Welcome to Canada's podcast.
Hello, this is Cynthia Lockery from Canada's podcast, where we talk to entrepreneurs who are making it happen right here in BC. Today, I'm excited to have Marcus New on the show. Marcus is a pioneer in the pre-IPO asset class with a career that spans over 3 decades in the private and public financial markets. He is the founder and chief executive officer of InvestX, a firm headquartered in Vancouver that delivers access and liquidity to the growth equity asset class and empowers the sell side to invest and trade in institutional quality private equity. Marcus is passionate about entrepreneurship and has made it his life's mission to be at the forefront of innovation and leadership in the financial markets. Welcome to Canada's podcast. I'm looking forward to hearing and learning more about you and your journey. So why don't we start about you telling us a bit about yourself and your current business?
Well, a bit about myself. I mean, I've been an entrepreneur all my life. When I was, young, from having the paper route. I know that today in today's world, most people wouldn't even know what paper is. But having a paper route when I was 12, putting on school dances when I was 16 at high school, to running student painters, which was somewhat a college pro, if you're familiar with that, which still is around. During the summers going to university, and then eventually, starting a financial company in the kind of internet era, and then mid 90s. And so I've had a kind of a long career. I've always considered myself an entrepreneur since I was young. And I love it. And I'm passionate about it. I'm passionate about other entrepreneurs. And I'm passionate about just people that want to, make the world better and make amazing products and serve customers and do so in a way that creates a lot of, as you know, sacrifice in a lot of different areas of their lives typically. But the thrill of it and the passion for it is really extreme. And our current business that we started 9 years ago, I guess, really came out of my experience in building a company called Stockhouse, which was a financial community online where about 1 million investors would use it a month to get access to public equity markets. And sometimes you have to be deeply in something to really understand where there's opportunity. And so as we cover the public equity markets, we saw that a number of these companies, when they were going public, were starting to stay private longer. And so the background in the venture ecosystem, which is really where the biggest companies typically go public, they start off with, kind of this idea they call it a seed investment, and most companies can't make it to the next round, the A, Series A, and then the B and the C. And the most successful companies is basically like the world's fiercest competition, for world-class companies and, getting access to capital, because they continue to have to really progress their business in a really substantive way. And what we found when we were in the public markets was that a number of these private companies all of a sudden were staying private longer. And this was back kind of in 2013, 2014. And when you looked at it, what you saw was there was a number of large institutional investors like Fidelity or Wellington or TPG that were coming in, and basically instead of that company going public, they would say, look, we'll write you a check for $300 million, and just stay private longer, and we will capture the returns in that company. What was really fascinating, Cynthia, about that was that the company at that stage of the business would historically go public. So, for example, Amazon went public with about $442 million, was kind of the size of the business when it went public, right? Facebook went public at $107 billion, right? And so you saw like $106.6 billion of value was created in the private markets, that only people that got access to that were some of these large institutional investors and obviously the employees, right? Whereas Amazon, most of the returns came for public equity investors, which are everything from pension funds and institutions to obviously the average retail investor. And so when we started to see these companies staying private longer, literally there was about 10 institutional investors, maybe 12 that were making all the money. We said, this is fundamentally unfair. Why in the world should only those 12 people or those 12 funds be able to get access to this asset class? We said, there's got to be a way for us to provide broader group of people access to this asset class. And so that was really kind of the foundation. And it was kind of the foundation of us starting Stockhouse too, which was, why in the world should the brokerage community own all the information and so regular retail investors can't actually make any own decisions, and they have to pay massive fees. You may not remember this, but back in the kind of 90s and early 2000s, especially in the 90s, brokers used to charge like 3.74% to put a trade in. The market makers would take another eighth. And so when you started to think about like the cost of trading, it was massive. Like you lose 10% of the return just to the fees to Wall Street, in effect, or Bay Street. And so, then what happened was information sources like us and Yahoo Finance and others came in, and then the discount brokers came in. And what it did is expand the market 10x. So the number of people trading the market now is 10 times what it was because information became available. And we were a big pioneer in making that happen. And we saw ourselves a little bit, not to be so, dramatic, but, a little bit of like, the way to kind of help many. I want to call it Robin Hood, but, to help many be able to get access to that. And then, of course, that market grew a lot. And so when we saw the private markets, we actually saw some similarities to what we saw in the public markets back in the 90s, which was, small group of institutional investors controlled the market. They made all the money. No one else did. And what made it even worse, Cynthia, is that these companies, were the best companies in the world. Like, when you get up to the final stage of venture capital and they go public, they're typically the best companies in the world. You can think of Airbnb or DocuSign or Uber, all these kind of companies, So not only could investors not get access to them in the private markets as they stayed private longer, and they started to move up the average amount of time that they would go public from kind of 5-6 years to like 12-13 years, right? But they also couldn't get the IPO shares because it was always controlled by Goldman Sachs and Morgan Stanley. So not only could you not get access in the private markets, you could also not get access when it went public. And so the regular investor was in effect, having all this return captured by a small group of institutional investors again, right? And so we said, look, this is fundamentally unfair. And so we need to go and we need to fix that problem. And so, but what was, I think, one of the most exciting things, though, is that these are the most amazing companies driven, run by the most amazing entrepreneurs and leadership teams in the world. These are world-class companies that have really become the things that are most mainstream here. And so we found a way to be able to really drive those returns to, more investors instead of fewer, which is really how we started the company.
And I love how you started in Vancouver.
Absolutely.
So is there any job or experience, and it might not even have anything to do with your current work, that really, really motivated you to be an entrepreneur and to go down this entrepreneur route?
I think my story is probably a little bit different than many entrepreneurs, and my whole community really is of entrepreneurs. And I love, and as I mentioned, I'm very passionate about entrepreneurship. I've just had it in my genes, I think, since I was young, right? I did have a little bit of modeling from my parents, who had some different, kind of experiences being an entrepreneur. Not the way I would think of it today in terms of running big businesses, more like my dad was a photographer who had his own small photography firm, but and my mother, worked to build an education program for people to help them, become certain skills in terms of geriatrics. So the construct of that was that, I had some modeling, but I've always just been passionate about the creativity of like, doing something, making some money from it, figuring it out, and many people would, maybe put that energy into a lot of other things, development, programming, whatever it might be. Mine was just really just super fascinated about all of those different things. And so it started early, as I mentioned, and that was really kind of, I think just a constant passion of wanting to do it, but also a constant passion of wanting to be really the best at it. Like I had a high drive for achievement. And so, so I just didn't do it. Like when I did student painters, I was number one in the country. And then when I was number one in North America, and so I always had a passion to be really, to be highly achievement oriented and to do it extremely well. And I've really taken a lot of that. And I think that's just built into people, right? Where you have a creativity, the passion for that creativity that can be expressed in being an entrepreneur, can be expressed in any kind of trade or craft, of course. And mine, I got to be expressed in being an entrepreneur.
I love that. Is there any advice that you would give to an entrepreneur who's just starting out?
Yeah, I think, the great thing about being young is that, you have no fear, or typically have no fear. And you also usually don't have too many dependencies and, financial commitments. And so I find it's probably easier to start when you're young. But But one thing, I think that there's lots of different types of entrepreneurs, right? And they're all equal in terms of, kind of pursuing their dream. And so, but they are quite different in terms of what their ambition may be. So, for example, you can have an entrepreneur that would love to just have their own business and have a franchise of something. And there's no less them not being an entrepreneur than I would be an entrepreneur running a different kind of business, or someone that was running a business with 5,000 employees. They're still all entrepreneurs. But what they may do there might be different in terms of how they might start or set up or something like that, right? So if you want to do your own thing, you have a passion, and Gerber and the E-Myth talks a lot about this, right? Where people that were the accountant want to, they say, I don't want to work for the man or the woman anymore, and so I want to start my own, and so they go through that process, But I think that if I think from technology, which is where we really are, go talk to customers and see if there's really a problem, and talk to a lot of them before you go do something, right? And so, because if you go talk to a lot of customers and say, look, this is a solution thinking about, they say, all of them say there's a problem, then you have a good start for something. If all of them say that's not a problem, right? And this is a big issue we see all the time. People build stuff with no problem to solve, right? And so they spend a lot of time and energy, and then they get kind of disgruntled about it. But that's in technology. In other areas, you can start a store, a retail thing online, or there's lots of different ways to be entrepreneurs today, especially with the internet. But I always say, there's a couple of things that I always recommend. One is find a group like EO, for example, is a great group for entrepreneurs. Of course, you have to have a business certain size, but they have a program called Accelerator. For if you had, for example, $400,000 in revenue, I think you can join Accelerator. And those are learning programs that are helpful. There's lots of groups online. There's lots of entrepreneurial things like Inc. magazine, and lots that write on entrepreneurship, different things about it. So learn the craft, because it takes a long time to be very good at it, right? You can have a great product and be a lousy entrepreneur and get some initial traction, right? Which is great, which is what most start that way, because they just don't have the skill sets, right, around how to build a team, how to, really understand product market fit, like all these kind of things they just don't know yet. And so my encouragement is go for it, start it, but, go talk to some customers first, right? And make sure that there's a thing there, because also when you talk to customers, you may get a lead customer or something, which also help you build some confidence and get the learning. But it's really all about learning initially, right? And if learning is not a core value of yours, I would really struggle to see whether you'd be a successful entrepreneur, right? Because you have to keep learning, not only about the market, the customers and products, but you have to keep learning about the skill sets required to be a good entrepreneur, which is really about team building, deeply understanding customers and product market fit and things like that. So those would be some of the things that I would always recommend.
I think it's great advice about the passion and the research and just connecting with people. So in terms of what you do, what are you most proud of?
Oh, well, putting it, if I think in the business context, when I started business, basically business, I think business, had a successful exit before this one. I wanted to design a culture, and this came through experience of, going through a lot of pain and issues related to, what culture meant. And, when you think about culture, most people say, the joke is that the executives go away for a weekend, they come up with some values and some things like that, and they come back, they tell everyone, they punch it on the walls over the office, and then basically it ends. So in my business before this at Stockhouse, I went through a lot of different issues in that business as a younger entrepreneur and growing up business, and went through a number of very difficult market issues, right? We had the financial crisis in 2008 and 9. We lost 50% of our revenues in 1 year, things like that. And so as I went through that and I started this business, I said, what I want to do is I really want to design the culture. So I started it from that kind of piece of paper first before actually hiring anyone. And then I described the values that were really, really important to me as an entrepreneur around people that I wanted to work with that had those similar values. And then what we did is we really incorporated that in to our business. And so we have a values interview, which, today might be a little bit more popular, probably, than maybe it was, 10 years ago, but where different people in our company are on that interview, and the questions are all geared around understanding the person's, aptitude for our set of values. And the way I describe it is like, it doesn't mean that you have to agree with them, what those values are. There's lots of places to work, but if you don't like them, this is not going to be the place. You're not going to be happy here, right? Because we want to have people that kind of agree on a base set of principles on how we want to do things. Because if we're all around kind of people doing our stuff, we're going to really enjoy it more, you know. And then, so I think that we've worked to really work hard to build a culture like that, and we're not perfect at it by any means. And sometimes stuff's on the wall and we don't practice it the way it should be practiced. But I think there's a genuine intent, at our all meetings at the end of it. Every time at the end of that meeting, we have an open session where people talk about other people that exhibited the values over the last 6 weeks. So we do it twice a quarter, in the company. And so we reinforce it through in our weekly meetings of the value we're going to practice that week. We reinforce it in the company level, talking about it all the time. We reinforce it in terms of people showing and demonstrating and calling out others that have exhibited it. And I think that's one of the things I'm really proud about is that, we built a not only highly capable, competent, skilled people that are passionate about the things that we're doing in terms of how we serve customers and returns that we take for portfolios for our clients, but also in terms of like having kind of those same like-minded people in the firm. And so that's, I think, there's lots of things that, that I'm proud about, but I think, that's probably one of them that's most important.
And I think that's great about how you bring your values to life instead of just being a list of words on a wall behind you. So let's talk about being in BC. We're both based in BC, entrepreneurs. What are some of the benefits of being here?
Well, I think most entrepreneurs start, sometimes where they live, right? And so, I lived here. I had another successful business here. And so I was able to kind of start this business, out of the office of my other successful business, before I sold it. And so I just naturally was here because I started here. Now, with that said, people are attracted to BC, in terms of the lifestyle, the outdoors, this kind of life balance piece that, people have been talking about for 15 or 20 years now. But there are some significant challenges too. Right. And so I think that if you have, certain type of workers that can come, that want to come to Canada, for example, from immigration perspective, and we've hired some like that, usually they're in technology, developers, product people, things like that, from, other parts of the world, they like to land in BC because it's just beautiful. It's not as cold, the weather's great, all that good stuff. The challenge in BC though, is it depends on your industry. If you're in the media industry, creative arts industry, things like that, there's a great talent pool here, right? Because the Hollywood North kind of idea, and it's spawned into other technology related investors, right? Or sorry, technology related companies, which is built more a bit of a tech ecosystem here, which is great. The piece that's challenging for us here is that we are in, asset management, and there are very few people in that category in this unfortunately in this province. And so, we set up an office in New York because that's where the talent was, right? And so, and I'm a member of a group called C100, which is kind of a bridge between Canadian entrepreneurs and venture capitalists and late stage investors like us and entrepreneurs that go down into the valley that are still Canadian and keeping their roots back in Canada, which I think is a great organization to do that and helping to build the Canadian ecosystem, right? Because a lot of that talent goes down to America. And if I was younger, to be honest, I probably would have had to move to Silicon Valley or to New York to really get it going. But because I, have been successful as an entrepreneur, I had more flexibility, but a lot don't, because you have to go where talent is on some level. So it depends on your business, right? In our business, it wasn't as important for me to be able to go, but if I was younger, I probably would have maybe had to move. But lots of other businesses really fit here well, right? So it's an attractive place to come. And, and we love Vancouver. I mean, it's beautiful, as you know.
Yeah, I think every person I've interviewed has said it's for the beauty. So how do you define success? And more importantly, how do you celebrate success?
I mean, that's a great question. I think, a lot of people define it different ways. Where I am most passionate and I feel success is happening is really in two things. When customers are served and are happy, right? You mean, and in our case, that means creating very good financial performance for their investments, right? Being able to service them well, Because we already delivered to them an asset class that is highly sought after that they want to have, that they just never been able to have. So our product's amazing because, we invest in Airbnb, a few years before it went public, for example, and DocuSign, all these amazing companies, Instacart we own, So, but with that said, so giving access is the real key thing, but for our product, but from a service perspective on how we think success is really if the clients are successful getting the returns that we expect, right? And that requires a lot of work and effective markets and a lot of different things like that. And then the second piece is the team, right? Is the team working really, really well together? And I get a lot of satisfaction of seeing that happen, right? We're really smart people, are engaged, they're working well together. We're kind of, we're moving through walls together. And adversity sometimes really helps in terms of doing that. And then the other piece is that, we try to create, not in a disingenuine way, but or maybe a more frequent way, disingenuine is not the right word, more automatic way. We try to build in some of the celebrations. And there's really two ways I've kind of described it. So number one is if we set quarterly goals every quarter, we communicate them to the company, and then we have rocks. That's what we call our goals, that are cascaded down throughout the organization. So every person has kind of 3 to 4 rocks for the quarter. Departments have rocks, and the company has rocks. Very typical, style. And then we have a celebration for us achieving 80% of them for the end of the quarter. And that celebration is company wide, and so we try to do things like that, right? In difficult times, though, what happens is sometimes, where you're in challenging, like last year's a very challenging market, right? So the stock market, very, very challenging. Most assets, most people lost money last year in most asset classes that they own because of the effect of interest rates moving up so high. We won't go into necessarily that financial discussion unless you'd like to, but so you had to find green shoots, right? But you have to be genuine. You can't just go and have a boat celebration because, you signed one customer or you made a great investment. I mean, the idea here is that, we have to reinforce it through, kind of acknowledgement more so than maybe big celebratory things. So I think it's always a combination of acknowledgement. So learning, small acknowledgements of things that are going well and green shoots that are going well, larger celebrations, and they all form part of the culture. When milestone objectives get hit, celebrations are important, right? And people want to feel good about that hard work. It can't be just all head down all the time, right? And so I think, we probably can do a better job at it too. We've got a really great person in our people and culture that leads that's really good at helping kind of put those things together. But, I think that that's something that, in difficult times is always hard to do well, I think.
Well, and speaking of difficult times, you're the CEO. It's on you. How do you deal with fear and doubt when that comes up?
Well, you got to be a bit like Teflon, I think. I think there's a couple of things. That, number one is that, is having a really good executive team, right? So that, can kind of share that not that burden overall, because they don't own it the same way, obviously, as the leader, as the entrepreneur does or the CEO does, but certainly, are a part of the solution and part of working through, how to deal with those issues, right? And then I think personally, you have to take care of yourself, right? Like this, especially when it's stressful, right? And so, you have to do some exercise. I mean, talking about things that people talk about all the time, and they're really hard to do, right? Especially if you're not doing them a lot, right? And so, but you have to get clarity. You have to spend some mindful time. And I know that's a top topic. I do it more in a devotions kind of thing. But I try to, do a little bit of that and a little bit of exercise 5 times a week. More important when it's stressful, right? When it's less stressful, I probably could do it 3 times a week, right? So, or 2 times. And I hate it. And I don't want to do it, right? So, but I know it's really important. Every time I do it, I go, thankfully I did it, right? So, but I need accountability. And so, so the things that are really hard, I really am a big believer in getting coaching, right? So every professional athlete has a coach. Every top performer has a coach. So I have different coaches too, right? So an accountability group. So I have an accountability group, for example. I have a forum group in EO, and we have a Whoop app, which is a Whoop band, which some of you might be familiar with. It's a kind of a sophisticated heart rate monitor, but it tracks our level of strain and whether we do exercise or not. You can see our whole group. And so just having that accountability of seeing on the app that the rest of them, there's 8 of us in it, makes you do it more, right? And so always having something like that. I have a devotion accountability group where there's a couple of us that text each other when we do that. So having accountability group is really important. And then the second piece is having a coach. And so we have an executive coach for our executives, but I also have a personal coach that helps me in terms of, trying to really create peak performance, working on the right things, talking through issues, right? And as an entrepreneur, as you know, it sometimes can be a little bit more lonely there, right? Because you don't have the same unfeathered, way of describing every fear and issue you've got, with your executive team. You don't want to scare the heck out of them. So, when sometimes you feel it. So but the construct of that is that, I think coaching is a super powerful way of doing it. Now, they're not cheap and it's an investment, but to me, that would be a highly recommended thing for, once your business gets to, a certain size, but, definitely having a coach should be helpful.
I couldn't agree more. Every jump that I've made in my career has been with a coach, and having and different coaches based on where you are in your journey. So I think that's great.
Well, Cynthia, I'll add one other thing to that, is we would think of it typically, in terms of a coach for our business, our executive team, et cetera. But I had a point that I hired a coach as well, just for my personal life, right? And I had, made a very typical error that a lot of entrepreneurs did, which was kind of overemphasize kind of the business and kind of underemphasize kind of some of my family. And so I hired a coach actually just to work with me, just to help me actually rebuild some of the skills that I needed and some of the commitments I needed in terms of spending time, and then it made a really good impact, right? And so having kind of an accountability coach just for that. It wasn't for business, it wasn't for execs, it wasn't for anything like that. It was just like, get my, kind of personal life rebalanced back. And so again, you could have coaches for different things. And that's actually been something I found a lot of entrepreneurs have asked me a lot about, was my experience with that, because I coached for about 2 or 3 years in that specific area of my life. And it's because if the entrepreneur has a good family life, they will be a better entrepreneur.
100% agree with that. So if you weren't doing what you're doing now, what's another career path that you could see yourself in, even in an alternative life?
Well, I love being an entrepreneur, but one of my core values is also generosity. And so, we spend a lot of time, I shouldn't say a lot of time. We spend time and financial resources to try to be generous. And we believe that, that we've been given a lot of opportunities. A lot of people in a lot of places in the world have not been. And so I think that if I was to think about being outside of business, it would probably be related to being involved with a nonprofit on some level, to use some of the leadership and building skills to be able to help, drive more of that. And so that's what I would see as kind of, if I wasn't in business, but currently I'm so passionate about kind of companies that we invest in, the area that we invest in. To me, these are amazing businesses. It creates a lot of passion. But I think in the next set or generation will look something more like that, where I'll take that same passion and put it back into people versus putting it back into kind of profits for people.
And is there any advice that you gained on your journey that you think would help other entrepreneurs?
Well, you can almost pull out any topic area for that. I think, I think that there's, at different points in my career, you learn different things. And again, I said at the very beginning, it depends on what kind of business that you want to have. Not every person wants to go and put in what's required to go build a business with 100 million in revenue, versus they want to maybe have a franchise, because it's a more cleaner way of being able to still be an entrepreneur, but have a lot of those things already done for you, right? And so those are very different types of things. And so for me, my passion was to build something substantive, and to really, so I think there's a couple of things that I look at. Number one is, I said at the beginning, learning has to be a core value. You have to learn, right? And and I just don't think there's very many successful entrepreneurs that don't have a core value of learning, right? And so, not to be so, formulaic. Obviously, the team's important. Now, the team's important, but most people don't understand how to get a good team. Now, a lot of businesses aren't big enough to attract good people either, but there's good people for different stages of the business. So you have to, one of the important things, I think, as a business grows, especially if it starts to scale quickly, is that you have to also be able to recognize when a person that is a Swiss Army knife that you hire at the beginning when you're 6 or 8 people, right? Is very different when you're 20. It's very different when you're 50. It's very different when you're 100, right? And very few can go through that transition, right? And so you just have to recognize that right at the beginning, right? Because if you hold that person too long, you may really affect your business. So that's why also starting to get, as your business grows bigger, you start to attract more quality talent because they want to be a part of something that's growing. They don't typically want to be in something with 6 people. And so then you got more people that can help you with those things too. But so the people that transition, and how those people can either get into different roles or maybe unfortunately have to exit the company. But as you go through that, so it's all about people on some level. So that's one aspect, right? So learning people. And then the other thing I think is that, think bigger, and I think this is an issue for a lot of people. They don't believe it could be really massive, or they don't understand maybe how to do it, but there's lots of resources to help to create that understanding. There's lots of books like Blueprint to a Billion and many like this that talk about some of these things. But when you think about, one of the things I think about as we invest, for example, but I also think about for our businesses, where are there markets where there's unlimited scale, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where versus defined markets. And I have an entrepreneur friend of mine phoned me literally last night. He has a software business in kind of a local service business, let's call it, that they service like a local service kind of business in the music industry. And when we looked at the size of that market for his product, the entire market in North America is like $30 million, right? So, maybe it's $40 million, right? So you're never gonna get half the market. So you've got 10% of the market, the max of that business is gonna be his $3 million business, right? And so the construct of that is that if you're building products for very, very small markets, it might be okay as a basically a job, right? Or maybe a lifestyle business, and it's totally fine. Nothing wrong with that, right? So, but if you want to build something that can scale and be or be larger, you have to be in markets that are sizable, right? So even though at the beginning you're not going to have anything that's be close to it, but it has to be in sizable markets. So I always think a little bit about that, and I've been trained more to think about that through how we invest today. So all the companies we invest in are massive markets solving massive problems, and they're usually the world's leader in it. So the other thing too is, scaling companies requires typically a big brother for the small brother, right? Or a big sister for the small sister, right? And so, they're very hard to do, but they bring immense credibility and accelerate businesses faster. So the faster that you're able to go and, partner up, get an investment from, get an alliance with, some of these big companies, they can actually bring you through a lot more doors faster, right? And we were very fortunate. We had a company called Jefferies, that invested in our business. It was a very, very large firm, investment banking, brokerage firm, financial services firm in the U.S. And they were able to open up a lot more doors and helped us to really kind of accelerate a business as well. And so those kind of things I should have done more when I was younger, right? I should have focused more on understanding the skill sets of how to find an A player and attract an A player, right? Because it was more just whoever you could almost get to come in. So spending more time there, spending more time on what are some, kind of big sister alliances that we could put together for the business, and then, continuing to learn.
I think that's great. Well, those were all the questions I had for you today. So is there anything else you want to add before we close out?
I think for entrepreneurs, the passion to do something is really great, but the passion is one piece of it only, right? I mean, I really would emphasize, and I tell this to my nieces and nephews too. I haven't found one that wants to be an entrepreneur yet, unfortunately. But if they do, just you need to learn. You need to put the skill sets in place. It is not natural. You weren't built with them, right? And so you have to put the skill sets in place. So take the passion, but start to really make sure you're learning and enjoy. One last thing. As I've gotten older too, and I write this down, and it's on my to-do list to remind me, right? Which is also to enjoy the journey, right? And sometimes you're working so hard all the time, or you're so stressed out because of all the issues, right? Sometimes you got to back it up and say, look, why am I doing this? Well, I want to enjoy the journey of it, right? And so, and the problems are just opportunities to create solutions. Sure, that's kind of a bit again formulaic, but if you really think about it, the way I think about it is, in deep problems too, especially is I will be smarter at the end of this, right? So no matter what, I will be smarter at the end of it. I will be more skilled, and basically I'm building skill sets here, right? You can't not build skill sets without adversity. And so I will build more skill sets, and I'll build more skill sets, and I will become, now people might think that that's a little bit too much, like, you're a computer trying to just keep getting smarter. Maybe I am.
Well, thank you for coming on the show. I definitely learned a lot and enjoyed our conversation. And we look forward to seeing you again.
Wonderful. Great to be with you, Cynthia. Have an amazing day.
You too.